Hey, welcome everybody. We've got a lot of people on the line today. New year, new Peplink University series. Peter, welcome to
Happy New
2025.
Year.
Yeah, happy New Year.
Next week, I'm going up to Wyoming. It's going to be 4 degrees, and I've got to do a whole bunch of installs. And so what I'm doing is like, how can I do all these installs, stay warm, and get them done as quickly as possible? And my brother 3D printed me this little grommet to help speed up antenna installations, and I was just looking at it. I'm very, very, very nervous to go to Wyoming next week. So
We'll have to talk offline. I've got some good, like, cold work gloves I can recommend for you here.
So it's going to be, but Happy New Year. What an amazing journey it's been with the summit or with these Peplink University webinars. And, the growth of the channel and the people that come on to watch us geek out and talk about innovations. And I'm excited because we're going to change it up a little bit in 2025. We've
Mhm.
been getting a lot of requests for the recipes, right? And you mentioned this earlier, so I'm just stealing your words.
Yeah, yeah.
But the idea is how things go together and how we actually take. Okay, we know what speed fusion is. We know what outbound policies are. We've now learned about the hardware and the firmware and how we're authorized Starlink partners and we do these Starlink webinars and what do those mean? And so what we're going to do this year is interview our customers. We're gonna start a customer stories section, and we're basically going to be talking about how we put these things together. How is Peplink used in the real world? How do we challenge ourselves to beat some of these big players? If you're a Peplink partner, you might know that is when you're trying to compete against some of these big enterprise guys. Why Peplink over something else? And so we're going to start telling that story in this year, and I'm really excited about that. And due to the holiday break, we thought it'd be a good idea not to overwhelm anybody, and so we thought we'd tell our story,
Mhm.
Travis and myself, and Peplink and you the partners, and how we became Starlink technology partners. Why Peplink is sort of leading this drive, and then we've got some case studies, some stories to share with you about how we're using Starlink in the real world with 5G and fiber and other solutions to accomplish missions.
Yeah, I love it. I think, the technology is always interesting and fun to talk about, but, talking about the real world, what people are really doing with it, how, what problems they're solving with Peplink, with Starlink, and like you said, the recipes, the nitty-gritty details on how they're getting those problems solved. So, yeah, I think it's a great time to make that change. And yeah, let's kick it off here with our side of the Starlink story.
It's funny because this first slide here, we talk about Peplink becomes the first authorized technology partner, but there's a lot before this. And I thought it'd be kind of fun to talk about how we became the first technology partner. And and I know my part of it. Like I know some of the stuff that I was doing with Starlink and some cruise ships. And then we started getting into some enterprise networking with Starlink and really doing some high bandwidth Starlink utilization with like EPXs and 2500 ECs. um, but I'm curious from your side of this, Travis, what that, what was this 20 kind of like 2022 to 2023-ish, right?
Yeah.
What that looked like from a Peplink side.
Yeah, it's so I mean it's fun because like you said, we're an authorized Starlink technology provider now, and that basically has been 1 year since we started that, since we officially opened that program up and became that partner with Starlink. But there was this whole history before that. And so from my side, and I think from a lot of Peplink partners' side, it started with the Starlink beta program, right? The Peplink the Peplink partner community and customer base are always innovators, and they always have been. That's been our history from day one. And so, as soon as Starlink opened up that beta program, we had several partners, myself as well, you as well. We're all beta testers for Starlink, and of course, we plugged them right into our Peplink routers. Wanted to see what can you do? Can you bond this? How does it work, right? What are these details? This is a brand new technology. That was the first low Earth orbit. constellation available to consumers, businesses, everybody out there. So yeah, it really started with that beta program, and again, so many different partners just plugging it in to see what happens. Literally, like how will this work?
I
But
remember Martin Langrid posting a picture in his farmhouse or wherever he was in Europe, and he posts this picture of the round, the original round dishy, and and he's like, I got it, 400 megabits per second. We're like, whoa, like this
whoa,
is insane. And so. And in the U.S. we weren't, unless you were in an authorized area, you weren't able to get it. It wasn't until they got, you had the beta program, and then they got the RV program, and then we could really start playing with this, sort of like skirting the limits of what we were allowed to play with, because we were able to get these Starlinks for RV and then use them wherever we wanted,
Mhm.
instead of waiting for it to be available in our zip code. And I mean, I sat on a waiting list for my zip code for, I think, almost 3 years. And when I found out I could get them for RV, I went out and bought like 30 of them, and we started playing with it. Um, and so it was amazing. And I just remember when we launched the technology partner program and having Starlink at the summit, we were having these meetings and talking about how we're gonna, can merge Starlink and Peplink together to create a reliable solution. And then, once again, Martin Langrid came over from Europe, and we set up, this demo at the Frontier Summit, and we shut down all the Starlinks at one time, and we turned them all back on using virtual machines and gRPC, and it was like, boom, we could do this with the router. And we and then we got added to the router, and we were able to um, really integrate the two hardware platforms together. And so I'm pretty excited about that, and I'm excited to share our story.
Yeah, I think there
Uh,
were, obviously there were ideas right away about what you could do with this in terms of combining 4G or 5G with Starlink, combining wireline with Starlink, but as always, the creativity of the Peplink partner network and their innovations really demonstrated that there was a lot more you could do, a lot more value you could do, and even just bonding multiple Starlinks together. And like you said at the summit, we had a whole bunch of them. But on top of that, just optimizing that user experience too, right? Getting that integration. So we had the ability to control the dishes, the ability to get diagnostic data, obstruction data from them, and really rounding out that overall experience. Now today we've got a very mature and valuable solution, and a lot of Peplink partners do not deploy Starlink without a Peplink router because there is so much combined value in using the two together. And so yeah, it's just been really cool to see how that's played out. And yeah, now we're in just rounding out that first year of our official partnership with Starlink, and there's just so much more, I think, possible for this next year now.
I Just yesterday we had a customer order 3 Starlink briefcases from us, and
Uh-huh.
so they wanted to be able to go out anywhere, set it up, and they have internet, and they're like, oh, but it comes with the router, and I was like, yeah, but we're gonna put our Peplink router. It's like when you get that within control, and you can see the router and you can log in. It makes a big difference on visibility into the Starlink ecosystem, and being able to centrally manage it within in control. And they're like, "Oh, that sounds awesome, yeah." Because they just needed Wi-Fi. They didn't want Speed Fusion or bonding, or it's just a Starlink Wi-Fi hotspot. But when you pair that with a B1 router, they basically have the best of both worlds. They can manage the routers, they can also see where they are, and then use the Starlink internet. I just thought that was a really cool use case. Um, so there's a lot of use cases, and trying to put these into a single slide is just not fair. If you're on this webinar and you've done any work with Starlink, there's tons of different capabilities, and we tried to, like, how are people using Starlink, and it was like, okay, we're using it as a primary. We're using this as a primary internet. Some people use it as a backup internet, and then we have our emergency response or the critical response groups. And so, and I know that's kind of like almost too simple, but it really does allow us to categorize how are we using Starlink. Is it going to be powering your entire everyday, or is it a failover for something, or are we trying to combine it with something? And that's where the emergency response comes in, right? Are we taking Starlink and 5G and Wi-Fi and microwave and whatever internet we can get, and we're combining those together to create an emergency response solution. And so that's sort of what those three categories kind of encompass.
Yeah, and again, I think in any of those categories, there's a value add for the combination of the Starlink and Peplink solution together. There's additional capabilities that are exposed when you do that.
Starlink, because it's LEO, we have lots of Starlink dishes out there, and they're roaming across the sky at incredible rates. And the dishes are actually tracking those Starlinks and then reconnecting and connecting. And if you've ever played around with like an IPsec VPN or SpeedFusion VPN, you can actually watch some of that packet loss occurring as it's moving between dishes or kind of having a little bit of obstructions. And what Peplink has done with um, what Peplink has done with Starlink and the ability to aggregate Starlink or Starlink with 4G and 5G using SpeedFusion has changed how we can adapt Starlink into our environment. And so we've had a great success in customer cases, not just my own, but partners all over the world sharing their successes about how we're able to use SpeedFusion to actually increase the capabilities and the reliability of Starlink and just access level networks. I'm getting some questions. I'm going to try to do it as best I can. I'm not going to answer questions too much about not related to the topic, but can the B1 be configured to assign public viewable IP address from DHCP? So if you do Starlink mobile priority or business priority and then ask for a public IP, and then you put it in drop-in mode. In other words, you put the Starlink in bridge mode and you get rid of their Wi-Fi, then yes, the public IP goes right to the Peplink router and you can use that public IP. It would be great to be able to reset Starlink obstructions. It kind of automatically does that. The Starlink obstructions, it's always scanning, Alan. So it 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 if you reboot the router, it'll redo the fraction and the time obstructed, but the actual obstructions and the calculations to obstruction is done based on it's actually done live by the Starlink, and we're just reading that data. So and also reset via in control. I will demo that. So keep that one up, and I'll show you later. So the idea of using SpeedFusion with Starlink increases that capability. And so we're going to be able to demonstrate how we're doing that today.
You know, the nature of how Starlink works speaks to where the value in the combined solution comes from. Because it's a lot like driving really fast on the highway on a 4G or 5G network, right? In that scenario, you're moving fast and you're going past towers and you're roaming, and so you're going to have these short little handoffs, these short little ebbs and flows of packet loss. And the same is true even when you're sitting still with Starlink. You've got the towers are moving over above you. You're not moving yourself, but you're still roaming in those scenarios. And so there will be packet loss. There will be these handoffs and these short little events. And depending on who you are, those are going to be noticeable in some specific ways, you know, for video conferencing, hosting a webinar like you and I are, right? If we did that with just a single Starlink or a single 5G connection, or really any connection, you're going to have those short little interruptions. And for some people, that's no big deal. If you're just at home watching Netflix and that's your only use case for Starlink, then maybe that's okay. But anybody doing work, real-time voice, video, those types of applications, they care about those interruptions. Those are a disruption to their business. And so that's where Peplink is able to fix that problem, either with multiple Starlinks or with Starlink and a 4G or 5G connection. You can overcome those challenges. You can remove that packet loss. And so that's really, you know, any of those scenarios you showed on the previous slide are benefited because of that, because we can
Yeah.
overcome those natural obstacles.
An anonymous city just asked, what about the 200 megabits per second limit on SpeedFusion? So there isn't a 200 megabit per second limit on SpeedFusion. There's a 200 megabit per second limit on SpeedFusion Connect that's included with your service, with your router purchase. When you buy a router, the idea is that it can create a SpeedFusion tunnel between two Peplink routers. That is not limited by 200 megabits per second. That is limited by the speed of those routers. So a BR2 Pro 5G connecting to an SDX can talk at 500 megabits per second. SpeedFusion Connect, which is Peplink's publicly distributed bonding service designed for consumer use, and some businesses use it too. But the idea is that if you don't have a SpeedFusion configuration, you can use SpeedFusion Connect. SpeedFusion Connect is limited to 200 megabits per second, and you get like 500 gigs or a terabyte that's included with your router. However, if you need more than 200 megabits per second, or you need more than 500 gigs or a terabyte, you can upgrade to their Pro version, which gives you 400 megabits per second of SpeedFusion Connect and unlimited data. And you pay monthly, and it's not very expensive. Or you can buy two Peplink routers. Like I have a 10 gigabit internet connection here. I have an EPX router, and I bond to my office. And so I don't have any limitations on bandwidth or capacity. And that's a lot of our enterprise customers that are using Starlink for bonding, which we'll talk about. They're not they're not using SpeedFusion Connect. They're using SpeedFusion and going to a really high speed internet connection at a data center.
Yeah. And so, yeah, that SpeedFusion Connect service, there's a 200 megabit per second limit. And the intended use case, or the use case we envisioned is, yeah, you're a home user, or you're a remote business user, or a small office, and you need to protect Zoom and Teams and your voice over IP connection. You're not necessarily going to send every bit of your internet traffic over SpeedFusion Connect. And so the speed limit is there to help everybody share that, and not let somebody at home sit there and just pound away on their, file downloads. If you want that, again, there's a premium tier like Peter talked about. And for the people that are trying to send private files, office to office, router to router, there's lots of different ways that you can achieve, basically almost any scale beyond 10 gigabits now with some of the newest routers. So that limit is just there for that free included version tier that is offered there for a convenience service, basically.
There we go. Okay. So bonding with Starlink, there's two types. Well, there's three types, but there's two types that are commonly used. Where we're either combining Starlink with Starlink to increase bandwidth and reliability, or or you can combine Starlink with 5G or 4G for better diversity, right? So if you're in an area where you have Starlink, or where you have 5G or 4G, then you can combine Starlink with 5G or 4G to act as extra reliability. In other words, and I always love the way Travis said this at the very first summit, we're increasing the number of nines, right? If I've got T-Mobile 5G, and I got AT&T 5G, and I got Verizon 5G, and I've got their priority services, and then I have Starlink, it's just increasing the level of nines of reliability. The more diversity I have, the more reliable it is. But not all internet is created equal. And it just means that it is not a linear scale of speed either. So it is important that you understand this, especially when you're talking about Starlink or 4G or 5G. In my opinion, this is my opinion, there are three types of internet. You have SLA internet. SLA internet, I pay for a gig, I get a gig. If you don't deliver a gig, you're going to reimburse me. There's a service level agreement to that speed. That's going to be your DIA fibers, things like that. Then you have best effort internet. Best effort internet is your broadband providers. I pay for a gig, and you're going to do the best you can. Oop, my light shut off. I apologize. You're going to do the best you can to give me a gig. But it's not a guarantee, and there's no SLA or contract associated with that. Then you have access level networks. Access level networks are you are paying to use the network, because the variability of interference, obstructions, signal strength, quality of your device, et cetera. There's too many variables for the company to provide you an SLA on throughput. And therefore, you're paying for the right to use the network. And a lot of times you're sharing that network with other people. So you have things like congestion, interference, quality of your device, quality of your signal that all play into how well these things will perform. And so when you're sharing a network like that with a lot of people, bonding is not 1 + 1 = 2. Bonding is what the way I like to say it, 1 + 1 = a really good one. Then 2, 3, 4, 5, and 6 start to add throughput, but you need to stabilize the connection first. And I always tell people that. It's like you need to create a stable connection before you can increase the performance of that connection. And so, it is important to understand that. And so when we talk about bonding multiple Starlinks, those are areas where there is no cellular, there is no Wi-Fi, there is no terrestrial internet. And these companies are going, hey, I need reliable bandwidth for 100 people, 10,000 people, or 20,000 people. And we need to make sure that it works well. And this is where we use like the balanced 2500 EC with 12 Starlinks, and we load balance and we bond and we mix technologies together to create a really robust network to accomplish the mission. And then we have customers like our emergency responders, our healthcare, mission critical business applications, where they're going, I want the most reliability possible. And so they've got their broadband or their fiber, they've got the 5G, they've got Starlink. I mean, I run that at my house. When hurricanes come through, different internet connections go up and down, but my network stays up and running. And the reason is because I've got broadband, fiber, Starlink, and 5G. And so
Mhm.
I just don't have to worry about it. My a lawn care company ran over our cable modem on the 1st of January. It's out. I didn't know. I didn't even know it was out until I got a notification from Starlink saying, "Hey, you used up all your data," and I was like, "What?" And so that's the nice thing about this is I didn't even like me being the Peplink guy. I wouldn't even. It's just our internet was working. The kids weren't complaining. We didn't care. Um, it wasn't until I got a notification from Starlink that we were using up all our data that I even looked at it. And so that's the idea here is you can use Starlink as increased stability and reliability on your network, or to power a large network. And so you got these different options here for it. One of the first jobs I ever did was for a POC for a ship, and I got a call probably 4 days before. I think it was 4 days before, Travis, and it was like, hey, we want to test this Peplink technology out. And I was like, sure. Let's what can we do? Well, we need to test it on a ship. And I was like, okay. And so they asked for some EPXs. And so obviously being, multiple EPXs, I called Peplink like, hey, can I borrow some EPXs? That's it's not one, it's multiple. And so we nailed one down, set it up in a data center. We took one onto a ship, and then we took one onto an island. And we basically tested combining 12 Starlinks to power 4,000 users. And the ability to combine Starlink together and use them as one internet connection, not one type, but one internet connection. So we were load balancing across all of them, and we were not bonding. But what we were doing was creating a whole bunch of lanes that the 4,000 users could work on. And it was an adventure. We had to upgrade some firmware. We had to kind of tweak how we interacted with the ship. And then we set up a test where we put just the crew onto it for one night. And the next morning, I kid you not, this lady was crying, saying it's the first time she's talked to her kid in 6 months. And it was like, she's like, that's the best internet I've ever had in my life on a cruise ship. And we're like, whoa, like we get this every day. Like, I mean, we get awesome internet every day. And for them, it was like life changing. Um, and so we started doing that testing. We were pushing out the Starlink infrastructure, and then we went to the island. We set up Starlink with 3 Starlinks and an SDX at first, and then we ended up upgrading it to an EPX to handle the usage, the user counts. But the idea was mind blowing at the time. I mean, now it's like everybody's like, oh yeah, I bond 100 Starlinks together or whatever. But back then it was like that was like, as far as we know, the first bonded, load balanced Starlink connection to power thousands of users. And lucky for me, we picked the EPX because we'd actually really pushed the EPX to its limits. Even though the EPX supports 20,000 users, the the number of WANs and the sessions really put a toll on the processor. And Peplink actually ended up releasing the 2500 EC that just smashed the performance that we've ever dreamed of with the EPX. And now with the B5000 that's being tested this month, we're hoping to smash those records. So incredible use case and demonstration of Peplink's ability to bond, load balance, integrate with an existing infrastructure. And we did all of this without ever taking the ship down. We built this, set it up, managed the whole thing, and then moved VLANs over and never took the ship down. And so we were able to do this without intruding on anybody's usage as we moved through the ocean from Miami from from Miami to the Bahamas. And so it was a great experience. And now we have hundreds of thousands of users across multiple cruise ship companies using Starlink every single day. And so it's really amazing.
Yeah, and this was really the marquee, I think, attention grabber for so many people because what you were able to demonstrate, Peter, was that we could do something that Starlink couldn't even do themselves. Peplink was able to deliver something that Starlink could not do yet. They couldn't deliver that amount of throughput and reliability to a single location, fixed or mobile, right? This predated their community gateway solution. This was a precursor to something else that that customer would probably end up using. But again, that was well over a year before Starlink was able to do that themselves. And so again, there's combined value no matter what, how high or low on the ladder you are in terms of how big your problem is. And so that one really grabbed a lot of people's attention because, cruise ships are one way to do that, but there's all kinds of different Peplink customers now that are bonding multiple Starlinks for lots of different scenarios.
Exactly. And just for everybody that argues, I get a whole bunch of questions about Starlink performance. We've pushed 4 gigabits per second over these routers. There are a lot of variables that you need to understand when it comes to Starlink, 5G, 4G, not just Starlink. Starlink's just popular. This is not a Starlink issue. This is an everybody issue. Whether it's you're bonding lots of T-Mobiles, you're bonding AT&T, you're bonding AT&T and T-Mobile, you're bonding Starlink. The ability to aggregate throughput has tons of variables that must be considered, like latency, packet loss, the amount of throughput on the node, congestion, how many people are using that frequency interference. All of those things go into play. And so you have to set the right expectation for yourself and your customer when you're talking about bonding. Taking a 1 gig fiber and a 1 gig fiber and you add them together, you have 2 gigabits, you have 18% overhead, you're going to have, 182 gigabits of throughput, or I mean, 1.82 gigabits of throughput. It's a gig and a gig, it's math. When you're talking about internet that goes 400, 200, 100, 36, 42, and you've got 19 of these all doing that at the same time, and bonding is trying to send packets, it's not as easy as that sounds. And so what we're trying to do is take the most, with dynamic weighted bonding specifically, get the most use out of those circuits as possible. But there are variables like what plan you're on, what priority you're on, what congestion you're on. I've been able to go to events where I'm running mobile priority and other people are running the RV, the consumer priority, the consumer internet. I'm getting 180 megs down by 50 up. They're getting 16 down by 3 up. And it goes, and so it's like depending on what you're doing is going to make a difference, and where you are, what level of congestion you have, and then the plans that you have, and once again we talk about SLAs, the guaranteed bandwidth that you have. So the higher, more money you give Starlink, the higher priority you're going to be on their network, which is true for anybody.
Mhm.
What another really fun use case, and if you've followed me on LinkedIn, you've watched me do this. I have a Speed Fusion backpack, and so you can see my RV there. The RV has an HD4 MBX 5G, 2 Starlinks on top. I travel around the country demonstrating bonding. If someone asks for a site survey or demo, we take the RV out there and we can demonstrate the technology. But a lot of times lately, I've started flying. I'm driving my car, and I was like, man, I want that same internet on me at all times. And so I built the Speed Fusion backpack, and it's a BR2 Pro 5G. So it has AT&T and T-Mobile. It has Verizon and T-Mobile primary, AT&T failover. So I've got all 3 carriers, but just 2 active. And then I was like, man, I want my Starlink Mini to work. And so I bought a Starlink Mini. I carry it with me everywhere I go. And so here's my Starlink Mini. And I bought these connectors. So I have an Ethernet connector and a USB-C connector. And this requires a 65-watt USB-C power in order to function. And so then I was like, well, how do I integrate this into my backpack? And my backpack has Ethernet ports on the top. And so I bought a 100-watt 12-volt to USB-C adapter, plugged that into my battery, my 195 watt hour battery. And now in my airplane, in my car, wherever I go, I've got dual 5G and a Starlink Mini. And so today I'm going to be flying up to Columbus, Ohio, and I'm expecting to get 140 to 160 megabits of internet at 10,000 feet in the air flying to Columbus. And so the idea of connectivity everywhere and the way that Starlink enables that, right? 4G and 5G is awesome when it's available, but when you're 10,000 feet in the sky, 4G and 5G don't work. When you're in the desert, 4G, 5G doesn't work. When you're in the ocean, 4G, 5G doesn't work. And so we want to make sure that we increase that reliability. And so, but when I'm driving, and you can see kind of in this picture, I've got my T-Mobile, I've got my Verizon, I'm connected on my 5Gs, and I've got my Starlink, and we're bonding all those together. And I do these webinars often right from the road on this solution, combining these throughputs. And I did upgrade my Starlink. It is running the mobile priority plan. You cannot fly in an airplane with the $30 plan. It's not going to work. Once again, the plan matters. Um, but the cool thing here is if T-Mobile or Verizon were to fail, I fail over to AT&T, and so it gives me that extra redundancy if I need it. Another cool real world use case is this is a mobile dental unit. The mobile dental unit wanted to have uh, the best connectivity. This is the best connectivity I've ever done for a mobile dental unit. No, I'm sorry. This is a mobile eye exam unit. We did this in partnership with in Naples, Florida, with University of Miami, and they had a mobile eye exam. This is a Sprinter van. And I was like, oh my goodness. And so, but they've been buying HD4 MVXs for all their larger mobile medical units. And they just said, hey, we want the mobile medical, the same kit, but we also want Starlink because when the hurricane went through Naples a couple of years ago, it knocked out all the cell towers. And they wanted to make sure that if the cell towers go down, they still have connectivity and to provide services, which I think is incredibly honorable. And so we installed the flat high performance and the antennas. And you'll notice they're kind of close together there. That is not by choice. It was a Sprinter van with there were solar panels and blockages. It was very difficult to get those to fit. So we took the 0.02% blockage of the plastic antenna there, and we just accepted that as a loss. But the idea was that with Starlink and Quad 5G, we're able to get really reliable connectivity, and they sure enough, and they never go down. And the way we actually do this is it primarily runs on 5G. So they just have the 50 gig plan on the Starlink. It's the mobile priority 50. And so the idea is they run on 4G and 5G. They have AT&T, Verizon, and T-Mobile. And then in the event that those do not exist, it then fails over. So we do this what's called priority. And if you want to play around with that, we have videos on that, outbound policy video. But the idea is it goes from 4G and 5G bonded, and then it fails over to a Starlink. So it's not using the Starlink unless they need it. And it's a way of saving monthly. They can keep the cost down low. They use several hundred gigabytes a month. And so we wanted to make sure that we could use that bandwidth, save that bandwidth for when they need it.
I love your description on that, Peter. You accepted the 0.2% blockage because this is real world, right? Like, is it ideal to have everything that close together? No, it's not ideal, but this is the real world, and there are other trade-offs in play here, right? People care about the solar panels, the AC unit. They care about those things too. They care about how many holes you punch in their roof. And
They
so
care about
it's
how it
real,
looks,
yeah,
the
and
aesthetics.
aesthetics.
Yeah,
Aesthetics
the
matter a
aesthetics.
lot. And
So
so in the real world, you can't have the ideal spacing almost ever sometimes. And so these are the challenges we have to accept sometimes. And that's how the Peplink partners add value. And we use Speed Fusion to help overcome those real world challenges.
somebody asked a question: Can a car with two Starlink Minis connected to a BR Pro 5G with SIM card and 5G, one in the front, one in the back? Yes. So we're actually running. I actually ordered another Starlink Mini to run that test, Daniel. And so the idea is you could definitely use more than one. And actually, so one of the tests I'm doing, which if you follow me on LinkedIn, you'll see we're 3D printing a suction cup mount for my Starlink Mini, and I'm going to put two of them in my sunroof and see if I can use it through the sunroof because it works in my airplane glass. If I put it in my cockpit of the airplane, it works. So I was like, man, if I could just suction cup it to the sunroof and I have two Starlinks. So I don't know if it's going to work. We're going to try it. So but and then that'll go into my BR2 because my BR2 has dual WAN, so I'll have two 5G, two Starlink bonded together. So wait for that video to come when we get the suction cup mounts. I think we're 3D printing those, so we should have those soon.
Yeah, again, real world use cases. When we've been partners with Subaru for several years, and that was one of the areas where I first experienced the use of Starlink and frankly needed to use Starlink in combination with 4G and 5G. And, that was with the beta dish, the original round dishy, and we were using it on the ground in broadcast locations, and then the nature of the rally races, you got to just rip your kit and go and just race to the next spot because you've got 10 minutes to get there or however long it takes. But we were just throwing that dishy into the windshield and just, making it point up at the sky that way in between. And it worked really well. Is that ideal? No, it's not recommended at all, but it does work when you have to do that. And so I'm curious to see how your sunroof test
And
goes now.
it's funny too because when I'm flying, like today, I'm going to fly northbound. I'm going to be flying from Gainesville, Florida to Columbus, Ohio. And so as I fly, I'm going to get phenomenal throughput. It's like
Hmm.
140 by 50 or 60. It's phenomenal. But
Huh.
when I turn around and I fly south, the
Yep.
dish is kind of like, the airplane's kind of like here and the dish is here. And so I'm not really facing north. And so I got to kind of like tweak it. So I'm getting, but basically the entire cockpit of the airplane is my obstruction when I'm going southbound. And
Mm.
so I'm running like 30% like obstruction. But I'll tell you, we stay connected the entire time. We
Uh-huh.
plug that in, turn it on, and it stays up. And what's really cool too is Verizon, T-Mobile, and AT&T kind of go up and down, and they basically kind of augment some of the loss, right? So like I might get Verizon for a couple hours, I might get T-Mobile for a couple hours, I might get AT&T for a couple hours, and as I go through different regions, I pick up towers, which I'm sure pisses off the carriers because I'm 10,000 feet up, but it connects and it's really fun to see.
Yeah, I think, you mentioned your kind of three-tier explanation of different connection types, and I just kind of had a new idea bubble into my head. So if we relate to that like an NBA game, right? You've got your courtside access, right? You paid a whole bunch of money to get that top tier. You've got a seat. Nobody else is sitting in front of you. You're gonna have that bandwidth pretty much all the time, right? But every now and then a player or a ref might be in front of you, and so then you've got your higher tier, your lower tier seat where you've got a dedicated seat, right? You've got a dedicated seat in a good section, and you're going to be able to see most of the time from there. And then you've got your general admission. You're just going to get a random seat in a random corner of the facility, and again, if you've got that courtside seat, you're going to probably have that working 98, 99% of the time, but sometimes you might need to like leverage a view from a different seat here or a different seat there. And that sounds like what you're doing with the Starlink and the 4G, 5G connections as you're moving along through the air. Most of those connections aren't always going to be on at one time or another, but when you put them all together, you've got a view from one or the other or the next. And that's how you stay together is being able to use speed fusion to put those all together. You can't realistically sit in any, multiple seats at an NBA game, but that's kind of what speed fusion allows you to do is change between those constantly.
Sorry, I was answering questions while you were telling your story. The
Yeah, yeah.
I'm trying to keep up. There's some really, really good questions, and I hopefully I'll have some time to knock them out. So um, so this one was an interesting one. We did a security vehicle where they wanted to have 24 by 7 monitoring of the exterior of the vehicle. And actually, I just got permission today. One of our customer success stories will be this project, so it's going to be a lot of fun. Um, and so, but the idea was they wanted to be able to stream cameras all the time. make sure it's always up and running. And we have these massive like battery backup systems. There's solar panels on the roof. And so the solar panels charge the batteries. When they shut down the vehicle, the batteries power the entire system overnight. And then when the sun comes up the next morning, they charge it back up, or they can turn on the generator and charge it up. But the idea is just to keep it going through the weekends, at least for most point. And so they chose the HD4 MBX 5G with the Starlink high performance. We mounted it to the roof with some 42G antennas, and we're able to basically power 8 and 10, depending on the size of the vehicle, exterior cameras are all the way around the vehicle. And it's AI powered cameras. Really cool project where we're basically watching for guns or injured people, and they're and it's always scanning. And so, but the HD4 MBX 5G has that quad 5G, so we're able to take advantage of multiple T-Mobile, AT&T, and Verizon SIMs, and then have that Starlink there in the event that they're in an area that has no cellular service. So when they go out to the more the rural areas where cellular coverage isn't as good. And so what we did here is we set a signal cutoff ratio. So we said, if the signal of cell phone is less than 2, just shut it down and go over to Starlink. So instead of waiting for the cellular to be like not great, right? Wait till it's 2 or 1 bars and it's not really providing enough bandwidth to stream. We just said, just shut it down. If it's 3 or better, keep it. If it's 2 or below, shut it down. And that way, because we know we have the Starlink. And so if it's bad signal, shut down the SIM card, use the Starlink, and don't worry about it. And so it's a really fun use case about outbound policies, signal strength, bonding, the ability to do it, and then 8 and 10 cameras combined together, streaming 24/7, 365. So a lot of data, a lot of streaming bandwidth, and Starlink was able to carry that load very nicely. Another real world use case, which is absolutely amazing, and this customer actually just upgraded their routers, so that was fun for me. The mining, a lot of times in these mining sites, there is no infrastructure. And so, I mean, these are in the middle of nowhere a lot of times. And so there's very little cellular throughput, if any. And so the idea of powering 300, 400, 500 people and allowing them to live their lives in a mine shaft or a mining community, I don't want to say shaft, but, in a mining area, the ability to work and play. I mean, it's not like you get to drive home every night. There is no driving home every night, but you drive home, you'd be gone for a week. And so they need to make it towards a livable conditions where it's enjoyable. And so we were approached by a mining company, and we were able to actually deploy Starlink in conjunction with some 2,500 ECs to load balance user traffic and then bond corporate traffic. So we have the same router as a corporate VLAN, bonds internet to their corporate network and creates a nice, reliable, bonded internet. But then the users can go on Netflix, YouTube, Instagram, check their emails, FaceTime, WhatsApp, etc. And they're just load balanced across all the satellite dishes. And this the customer, the mining customer that I'm talking about, it's not this picture, but the mining customer I'm talking about. They just upgraded from 8 Starlinks to 16 Starlinks. And they called, hey, do I need to buy anything? I was like, what do you mean? Do I need to buy anything? Like I'm going to add more WANs. And I said, no, you have 2,500 EC that supports. Yeah, you're fine, man. And like, what do you mean? I don't have to buy to up. No. And he's like, well, then can I buy another one? I was like, sure, you can buy another one, but you don't like. And I love doing that to people. I love being able to say, oh, by the way, you can expand this network without costing more money. I had a customer that does radiology, remote radiology, and they wanted to deploy Peplinks to the remote radiologist. Like, well, how much is it going to cost? The radiology team, how much is it going to cost? And I was like, it's free. And like, what do you mean it's free? I was like, well, you already have an SDX Pro that supports 800 tunnels. You only have 5 tunnels for your mobile medical units. So you have 795 tunnels that you can plug into this thing. You're going to run out of bandwidth before you run out of tunnel space. And they're like, wait, what? I don't have to pay for that. I was like, no, the router comes with it. And I love doing that. It's like you get more, better, increased throughput, increased reliability. And the only thing you're limited to is the processor RAM and capabilities of your internet or the Peplink itself. Like, but it's not a software. We're not throttling. And so it's really neat to be able to offer that to people and save them a significant amount of money while increasing their reliability and throughput.
Yeah, and they're used to that, or they ask that question because these big vendors have conditioned them to that, right? They play all these nickel and dime games of like, oh, you want 100 megabits, that's another license. You want another VPN,
That's
that's another license, right? Everything is a new
it,
license, and
and it becomes a project. It's not even a
yep,
license, it's a project. Oh, well, we need to engineer that. Let's and so it's like we have the EPX 8 modular bays. And I remember a customer wanted to plug a 5G module in that. Well, how much is that going to cost? I was like, well, the modules, yeah, I think at the time it was 18.99 or some variant thereof. And they're like, okay, but how much is it going to cost? And I was like, 18.99. What do you mean? And I'm like, that's how much it's going to cost. Like, you just buy the hardware, you plug it in, and they're like, I don't have to turn on that port. I'm like, nope. And they were, I, so it's a lot of fun to be able to share that.
yeah, we get a
And
lot
then
of
our
questions like, "Oh, I don't like Starlink, I want to use OneWeb, or I don't like Verizon, I want to use T-Mobile, or, I see you've got your eSIM data plans. Can I use my own?" And yes, you can use any connection you bring, right? We are an open connectivity platform that makes you get the best use out of that connectivity, whatever it is that you bring to it. So you don't have
and
to use Starlink. You don't
and
have
that
to.
being said, we're talking about Starlink right now, and I didn't mean to interrupt, Travis. I apologize for that. We're,
Yeah,
we're
yeah,
talking about
no, go ahead.
Starlink, but it's any internet. It's just Starlink is popular. There's a
Yep,
lot more people using Starlink right now, and so it's just easy to talk about because people know what it is. But the
yep.
idea is, I mean, OneWeb, uh, I mean, Amazon solution, T-Mobile 5G. I mean, even if you're like if you're a WISP and you're running Wi-Fi or microwave connection or private point-to-point or CBRS or private 5G, it doesn't matter to us. Whatever
Mm-mm.
internet you want to give me, I will use, and I'm going to make it better. I'm going to increase the reliability, and we're going to make it usable, and we're going to make it scalable. And there's no licensing for that to function. And so, that's what's like, so the ability to solve these problems is just absolutely insane. Our last case study, and I'm going to answer some questions, but our last case study was our summit. So at the summit, we were at the Hilton Orlando, and if you want to go to the peplinksummit.com or peplinksummit.com, you can kind of look at that. And we do these trainings online, but we also do them in person. And at the Peplink Summit, I wanted to power the event, and the Hilton was like, "Hey, you've got to buy internet for us." I was like, I know you need me to do that, but I can't. I was like, I'm an internet guy. Like, you cannot sell me internet. Like, it's just not going to work. And they actually modified their contract to remove the requirement for me to have. I was like, I can't have a summit that talks about solving internet, then buy internet from you. It just like you have to let me like build my own. Um, and they said okay, and that is the roof of the Hilton, and they actually let us go on the roof. We dropped 7 Starlinks up there, and then down on the paddock, or not paddock, but the I don't know, lanai or whatever, we had 3 HD2 domes. And so we had 6 5G internet, 7 Starlink internet, and combine those all together. And we did have some technical difficulties at the summit if you were there, but it wasn't related to the internet. It was related to me using a prototype router and switch that I shouldn't have hooked up at the beginning, but we got it all fixed. But the idea, I got in trouble for that one.
I mean, again, it's real world, right?
It's real world. It's like, hey, I got this new thing. Like, you're supposed to show it, not use it. So that was my bad. But it worked. Everything worked, and we got it. We got everything up and running. But we were doing testing. I think we were clocking around 5 gigabits of available throughput, load balance between all devices, and it was absolutely insane. And the ability to do this at the Hilton and run our event was just amazing. Um,
Yeah, I know we're going to get into more questions here. Ryan had one that I think relates to this and the previous one, but his original question was about the cruise ship. And, And he's asking, with that many dishes, are you bonding everything or are you using load balancing? And the answer is both, right? Depending on
Yeah,
what traffic you're talking about.
correct. And a lot of people, if you remember back in the old days, people would like partition like a hard drive and separate like gaming partition and a data partition. Um, People try to do that with internet. Oh, I'm gonna put these three for this and these four for this. What we do is I'm like, hey, no, grab them all and let the corporate network bond them all, and then let the users load balance them all. And you can prioritize using QoS corporate data. So my Speed Fusion data is going to be high priority than my consumer data. But the idea is that I'm being able to take advantage of all of the internet available across all of them. And if I'm not using that data, then it's available to the guests. And so we combine load balancing, bonding, and WAN priority. If I've got a 10 gigabit fiber line, I don't want to bond that with 5G or Starlink. I want to put that in a lower priority than my 10 gigabit fiber line. And so you want to bond like connections. So you want to bond access with access, uh, best effort with best effort, and SLA with SLA. There are use cases where you can bond across those, but in general. And then you want to use outbound policies and load balancing to push traffic that doesn't need to be bonded. So many times people are like, oh, I want 8 gigabits of internet. Okay, fine. 8 gigabit internet connections is 8 gigabits of internet. Adding bonding takes processor resource and massive routers to accomplish. You need lots of processor intensity to do that. And most individual users don't need an 8 gigabit speed. They need a good, fast, reliable. And so I always talk about this, but it's expectation and making sure you understand the limitations of each circuit you're adding to the network.
Yeah, I loved
So
your first example of like using this internet connection for these applications and that internet connection for other applications. Like it always cracks me up because so many SD-WAN vendors use that as a real example. They're like, "Oh yeah, this is the connection that we send our video down." And it's like that's so out of touch with the modern world. Like that is such a 20 years ago way to do internet load balancing and internet traffic distribution. We do it at the packet level and we do it dynamically, sub-seconds, so that video is always best. Even if that dedicated access, that direct access link falls apart, it doesn't matter. You don't see that on your video because we're smarter than that. And that's what those
somebody asked
policies
earlier
talked
how
about are.
about the API integration. So here's my Speed Fusion Rebel. You can see my Starlink right there. It's connected. And you get this nice little logo, right, by the way, when you see that. If you click details, I get a lot of information here about Starlink. So I can see my fraction obstructed, my time obstructed, my download throughput, my upload throughput, my ping latency. But down here, whoop, I have reboot and stow. And so even if it's a flat high performance, if I want to save battery life, I can stow this, which basically puts it into a standby state, lowers the data consumption, and then I can unstow it remotely. And so I can do that. Then here I can reboot. So like say if you have a pending update, like a lot of times they'll say install pending, you can actually click reboot and it'll actually reboot and install that update for you. So if you want to update your router, you can do that by just clicking reboot right there. And so having access to these devices and being able to publish that, have that online is really nice and easy to do. And you can see like I don't run all my internet connections all the time. Like I've got a little Wi-Fi WAN there. I've got one internet connection, and then I've got this is an HD4. I've got four cellulars, but I don't. I mean, this thing's not working right now. I just have one there. I have a T-Mobile just as a connection. But when I take this out in the field, I plug. I mean, I keep all my SIM cards, and then I just plug it into the router I'm using. So I kind of have my Starlink, my Wi-Fi WAN, and my T-Mobile, and then and depending on which router I'm using, my backpack or my RV or whatever is what where I put all my SIM cards. I'm going to spend a few minutes answering questions, and then we've got an announcement at the end here. Okay, let's see here. Are you able to augment the API integration with Starlink to do things like enable snow melt? There are things that we can do. Like I said, right now we have reboot and stow. So enabling and disabling snowmelt, those are things that you would put in as a feature request, but we'd want to do, but technically we can't. With Starlink having bad upload rates, is there a way that Peplink device can bring about full duplex? So there are some tricks related to upload. One of the ones that is a hit or miss. It's not. It's based on content congestion and what plan you're on. But if you have a Starlink dish and you want to play with this, you can set up Speed Fusion Connect, and you can do it to either the 200 megabit circuit or you can do it to a Speed Fusion service. And what you want to do is enable dynamic weighted bonding. You want to ignore packet loss, set it to only do it based on latency only. And then what you want to do is enable WAN smoothing. I know that sounds weird because it's double parity, but either WAN smoothing or forward error correction high, depending on the level of packet loss that your Starlink has, and you're going to see a spike in your upload throughput. You are trading bandwidth though, so your overall bandwidth will be decreased, but your upload reliability will be increased. And then the other thing to pay attention to is you are consuming double data. So you send 1 meg of data, you're actually sending 2, and so you're paying for that. So but it is a way to increase the stability of your upload. And I just want to throw out Martin Langred again from Europe. He gave me that idea with forward error correction. I tested it with WAN smoothing, and it was awesome. And I've used it to save a lot of projects where I was struggling with upload reliability. And by enabling WAN smoothing or forward error correction high, depending on the level of packet loss, I was able to achieve my mission. So can you try 10 plus Starlinks on the same ship as there's a possibility of saturating LEO networks? So Starlink said that like you're kind of limited to 12 in a node. We've done testing all the way to 20 in an individual node and seen pretty decent results. So you stop getting linear growth. Remember I talked earlier about 1 plus 1 equals a really good 1. So what happens is when you start getting to like 12, 13, 14, 15, 20 Starlinks, it stops being like linear acceleration and more stability. You're basically saturating the node at that point. But you are 12 users on that network. You are going to get 12 users of internet. And that's the benefit. And I've done this with 4G and 5G for years. The reason why I'm able to do mammography with 4G is I just put 15 SIM cards in there. I only need 25 megs of upload, but 15 SIM cards, I'm 15 people on that tower. And so the same kind of applies to Starlink. Once again, it's not a linear. You add another one, you might not see any improvement in throughput. What you're going to have is more stability of throughput. And you got to understand that. Like you're going to have some growth and then you're going to have some stability. And the more internet connections you provide, the more stability you're creating.
Yeah, it's, like you said, with these access where you've got one ticket into the event, you get one time slice on that network. So if there's 100 users, you're 1 out of 100. If you've got 10 dishes, now you've got
10 out
1 out of 10.
of 100. Yeah.
Yep, 10 out of 100. Yep.
Yeah.
So
10
you
out of 100.
increase the amount of time you get to talk on the network. So that's what you're doing. You're not going to get, it's not always going to be 1, 2, 3, 4, but you'll get more time to talk.
Anonymous users asked if there's APs like the Cisco. Yes, we have the AP Pro outdoor APs and the AP-AX indoor APs. Those are Wi-Fi 6 APs. And they have 2.5 gigabit interfaces. And with our new switches, well, you can't see it behind me, but our new switches, we have 2.5 gigabit interfaces on those as well. And so, and they're yeah. I mean, I would say that if you try to compare it to like a $900 Cisco AP, it might not match up. But if you compare it to any standard enterprise AP, it'll match up.
Yeah, he was asking if you could manage the Cisco APs from the Peplink, and that's a no.
Oh, I'm
You can
sorry. I
only
read that. I skimmed. I'm watching and talking. I apologize. If you're trying to manage the APs, so we have something called InTouch. InTouch lets you actually manage other systems via InControl. However, it would not be in our ecosystem. You'd have to log. Let's see if I have InTouch on my. If I pull up my Tech Summit, 1 second. So if I pull up my Tech Summit and I pull up my Balance 5000 that I used at the summit there. So there's a feature called InTouch. InTouch will let you log in to devices. So I can SSH, Telnet, RDP. So I have an Ubuntu server and I have a Windows server. I can click on this Windows server and actually log into a Windows server, and I have Engage, which is Netgear's management platform, and I have a Netgear Pro AV switch on this network. And so I can actually use my in control and my Balance 5000. And this is a virtual machine running on the router. And so from here, I can load up at Microsoft Netgear Engage and actually log right into my Pro AV switch. And that's a 40 gigabit switch that runs SDI and NDI. We use it. A lot of our big broadcasters use this technology. And so the idea is, how do we manage it? That same question you just had, how do we manage that from anywhere? And with the B5000, the SDX Pro and better, you have built-in KVM virtualization. So I have a Windows server running my management software, which lets me log right into this switch and use it from anywhere in the world. And so there's my Pro AV switch. It's online, and I've got a 40 gigabit link from my Peplink router to this switch right now. So it's not completely integrated, but it is manageable. We are out of time. Are there any really? Let me take some videos using. I do. Miro asked if I can take some videos while using stuff flying. If you follow me on LinkedIn, if you search for me, Peter West on LinkedIn, or if you want to search for me on Instagram, I will live stream and throw videos on there, and then you can see it in real time. So, and I did a live stream actually while flying. The noise is insane, by the way. So, but we do it. Yep. So, and then finally, boop. We want to throw a shout out to our friends over in Europe, Adam Stedman with Peplink Podcast. So if you go to Peplink's YouTube channel, you can get all the latest news and information. But the Peplink Podcast is headed up by Frontier BV or EU, but Frontier in Europe, and Adam Stedman. And they do interviews and conversations, and I'm in their Christmas one. So it's sort of like Peplink University, but in Europe. And so, but they do customer case studies and testimonials and stories. And so kind of neat information. You can learn more at Peplink's YouTube channel. Okay. And then trying to see if there's any more. If we did not get to you, you can email us. There are a lot of really good questions. There are 37 questions here. This is by far one of the coolest interactive videos we've done. Please feel free to email us, Travis at peplink.com, Peter at westnetworks.com. You can reach out and send us an email. If we can't answer your question, we can get you in contact with the right partner. We do this all the time, especially, with people all over the world. So, we can get you in contact with the right partner that can help you, or at least help you find the answer. So Travis at peplink.com and Peter at westnetworks.com. Otherwise, thank you so much, Travis. As always, thank you. And please follow us for great customer stories this year. I've got a lineup coming down the chain here, just amazing customer stories from partners all over the world. And we're going to be talking about how we implement these technologies. And that is going to be our 2025 mission with Peplink University.
Yeah, we'll have live customers on the presentation here with us, ready to share their stories. So thanks again. Thank you, Peter, as always. I can't wait to see the next one we put out.
Have a good one, everybody. I'm going to fly to Columbus now. Bye.
Bye.